The night had started the way those nights always start. Ordinary on the surface. A packed room, bright lights, the usual electricity of a crowd that had come ready to be fired up. Nothing in the air suggested that what was about to happen would still be living in people's conversations days later, circulating across every platform, replayed in kitchens and offices and group chats by people who had watched it live and people who could not believe it until they saw it with their own eyes. But that is exactly what happened. And to understand why it hit so hard, you have to start 11 minutes before the moment itself. 11 minutes after Jimmy Kimmel's show finished airing on the East Coast. Before the credits had fully scrolled. Before the studio lights had dimmed. Before most of America had even reached for the remote. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, was already on his phone, already typing. Already posting a furious personal attack on a late-night television host who had just spent an hour making jokes about him. Not the next morning, not after sleeping on it, not after a quiet breakfast and a measured decision. 11 minutes. He had been watching. He had been sitting there the whole time, watching the show he publicly claimed nobody watched, hosted by the man he publicly insisted had no talent. And the second it ended, something inside him could not hold until daylight. The Post called Kimmel talentless, demanded networks fire him immediately, described the show as a disaster, described Kimmel as a bum, used the full vocabulary of contempt that powerful people deploy when something has gotten under their skin so deeply they cannot perform sleep. What those posts actually said, underneath all the attacks, was something nobody in the White House communications team would have approved if they had seen it coming. They said, "I watch every episode. I react in real time. I cannot stop paying attention to this person I keep telling the world I never think about." That is not contempt. That is obsession wearing the costume of contempt. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But that was only the opening act. The main event came at a packed public venue. Cameras everywhere. The full performance of a man who had been doing this for years and knew exactly how to work a room. He came in strong. He talked about accomplishments, about strength, about his standing in American history. He talked about television, about talent, about the legends. He placed himself next to the great names, and somewhere in the architecture of that speech, clearly building towards something, he landed on Jimmy Kimmel. He called him terrible. He called him talentless. He said the networks should have fired him years ago. The crowd responded the way crowds at those events respond, with noise and energy, and the comfortable warmth of hearing someone agree with something they already believed. And then he said it. He said, with complete conviction, in front of that entire crowd, under all those lights, with every camera in the building trained directly on him, that if he could not beat out Jimmy Kimmel in terms of talent, then he did not think he should be president. The room took a moment to fully process that sentence. Read it again. The sitting president of the United States had just told a room full of people that the standard for his fitness to hold the most powerful office on earth was whether he was more talented than a late-night comedian. He had chosen that comparison himself. Nobody suggested it. Nobody dared plant it. He walked straight into it, planted his flag, and stood there proudly waiting for the applause. The laughter that followed had something nervous in it. The particular quality that surfaces in a room that is not entirely certain what it is watching. When a crowd laughs but their eyes are still working, still measuring, still tracking whether this is showmanship or something else. It was something else. He brought Kimmel's family into it. The laughter thinned. Faces in the crowd shifted. People who had been leaning forward started sitting back slightly. The cameras caught it. The micro-adjustment of a room recalibrating its reaction in real time. And then came the line. 3 words arrived after a brief pause. Slow. Deliberate, carrying the full weight of the office behind them. "Watch your back, Jimmy." He added that messing with him would result in paying big time, and the room, which had been noisy and charged and electric for the previous 20 minutes, went somewhere between very quiet and completely still. Not the quiet of boredom, the quiet of a crowd absorbing something unexpected. The cameras tightened, the air changed. Every person in that building had just heard the President of the United States issue a direct personal threat to a television comedian. Not metaphorically, not as a joke that could be walked back with a grin. Straight out, unambiguous, delivered slowly enough that there was no room for misinterpretation. And now every camera was waiting for the same thing. What happens next? What happened next was not what Donald Trump had planned for. Because Kimmel, back in his own studio, did not shout. He did not reach for the sharpest insult available. He did not try to outperform the threat with louder noise. He did something far more dangerous to someone who had spent years surviving by controlling the emotional temperature of every room he walked into. He paused. He let the threat sit there in the air of the studio for a moment. Let it breathe. Let every person in the audience feel the actual weight of what had just been publicly said. And in that pause, before he had spoken a single word in response, he had already made his first point. He was not afraid. He was not scrambling. He was not reaching for defenses. He was ready. Then he went to the record, not his own words, not his feelings about Trump, not the opinions of a man who might be biased by self-interest. He went to Donald Trump's own publicly posted, fully time-stamped, fully documented words, and he started reading them out loud, one at a time, in that quiet, measured, unhurried voice that carries more weight than shouting ever does. The midnight posts demanding networks cancel the show. The declarations that nobody watches, the attacks calling Kimmel a bum, a disaster, a man with no business being on television. He read every one of them back to the crowd carefully, without commentary, without performance, simply letting them exist as the documents they already were. And right beside every single attack, without editorializing, without exaggeration, he placed the proof of what Trump actually did. Watched the show live, posted reactions within 11 minutes of it ending, quoted specific jokes back in the attacks, jokes that could only have landed in those posts if the person posting them had been listening to every word in real time. The crowd started laughing, but the texture of that laughter was completely different from anything earlier in the night. This was not the nervous laugh of a room uncertain what it was watching. This was the specific, deeply satisfying laughter of people watching a pattern become visible for the first time, even though the pattern had been there all along. Kimmel looked up from the record. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He made one observation, delivered simply, without drama, and it landed the way clear statements of obvious truth always land when they are finally said out loud, in the right room, at the right moment. He said that when powerful people speak carelessly, their words do not disappear. They are saved, they are screenshotted, they are time-stamped, they create a trail. And that trail, followed honestly, without exaggeration, tells you exactly who a person really is. Not the version under the rally lights. Not the version performing for the cameras at a packed venue surrounded by a crowd eager to believe whatever they are told. The real version. The 12:49 in the morning version. The one that cannot stop watching, cannot stop reacting, cannot stop caring about the one person in television that this powerful, busy, consequential man keeps insisting he has never once thought about. The crowd did not just applaud, they rose, because what Kimmel had given them was not comedy. Not in that moment. It was something that comedy occasionally becomes when the conditions are right and the material is honest enough. It was clarity, the particular satisfaction that arrives when something confusing suddenly resolves into complete, perfect, unmistakable sense. The feeling of a picture snapping into focus. Trump had arrived with fire, with a threat backed by the full weight of the most powerful office on the planet, with the expectation that the target of that threat would either fold or fight back in a way that made the whole exchange look like a two-sided brawl, where the truth got buried under the noise and everybody ended up looking roughly the same. Kimmel had answered with something fire cannot burn and weight cannot crush. Evidence. Delivered quietly, organized carefully, aimed with surgical precision at the exact gap between the public performance and the private reality. And the crowd, stunned, standing, roaring, delivered their verdict. Not at the end of a lengthy political argument, not after a long and complicated debate about policy or character or history, at the end of a simple, honest reading of the record, because the lesson of that night had nothing to do with television. It was not really about ratings or talent or who lands the better punchline. It was about something older and more durable than any of that. Words matter, actions matter, the record matters, and a man who threatens you in public while watching you in private has already revealed, without meaning to, exactly where the real power in that room belongs. The threat was supposed to be the ending. The evidence made it the beginning. Trump came in swinging with everything he had. Kimmel answered with the one thing he had not prepared for. Not louder noise, not sharper insults, not a bigger performance. The truth, backed by timestamps, delivered without drama. And when the crowd finally exhaled, when the standing ovation settled back into seats, when the noise dropped back to the everyday hum of a studio between moments, something had shifted, not just in that building, in the conversation that followed, everywhere. Every kitchen table, every group chat, every office where someone leaned across a desk the next morning and said, "You have to see this." Some nights you watch television and forget it by breakfast. Some nights you watch something that stays with you. This was one of those nights, and the reason it stayed is simple. Because for one clear, unforgettable stretch of time, in a room full of cameras and noise and performance and power, the simplest possible thing turned out to be the most powerful thing available. The record spoke, the crowd listened, and nothing else needed to be said.